Hi, I'm Daniel Miller with NASCO, and we've been talking about staff evaluations and how to make them a productive tool for your co-op, your members, and your staff to grow and move forward and do the co-op's work together. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about an outline of what a useful evaluation process can look like and how to make it something that is a genuinely useful tool for your members and your staff. So let's talk a little bit about what the outline of an evaluation process would be. One thing is you're going to want to determine the timeline for an evaluation process and make sure that everybody knows what that timeline looks like, including the members and the staff. So this evaluation timeline means that in 2 weeks we're going to give a survey to the following groups of people. They'll have 2 weeks to fill it out. Then there will be 2 weeks for us to compile those survey results and to do follow-up one-on-one interviews with people, and then the board will have 1 month to compile a report, and then the staff will have a week to read that report and make a response to it. That might be an example. But you want to make sure that that process is something that everybody understands so that everybody can hold one another accountable for making sure that process actually happens. Something that co-ops get into sometimes is saying, well, we know we're supposed to have an evaluation, and I guess the board is supposed to do it, or whatever. We're going to ask the general manager to do this evaluation, and then it doesn't actually go anywhere. Or you get halfway through the process and then there's never a report, or there's no follow-up. So make sure that you have that outline and everybody knows what the schedule is so that you can hold everybody accountable and say, oh, I thought we were supposed to have that report by now. You know, where is it? And is there anything that you need to make sure that this happens and leaves a tool for members in the future? You want to create or approve the materials that you'll be using. So if you haven't done evaluations in the past, then you'll want to create some surveys, and we'll have some links that we can share in the notes for this webinar about how to use those surveys in a way that can be adapted to your co-op's needs and give you some templates to start from. If you have been doing evaluations in the past, look at the tools that you used for doing those evaluations. You're going to want to look at what the process was, what the surveys looked like, what the interview questions were like, and what sorts of reports and follow-ups you had after that evaluation process. Having some sort of consistent format from year to year or from evaluation to evaluation helps everybody know what to expect and creates a system for helping you measure results and look at trends over time. That doesn't even apply just to a single person. Maybe Daniel has worked for the co-op for a couple of years and you evaluated them 2 years ago and last year, and so you want to evaluate them this year and look at the trend over the last few years. Well, let's say Daniel just started this year, but you may want to compare their performance to how their predecessor did so that you can get some idea, well, actually we keep hiring people that seem really great and then they keep not living up to expectations. Well, maybe that's not about the people that we're hiring. Maybe they actually were great and we were giving them a very difficult job or not giving them the tools they needed. Or maybe it's that we're not advertising what it is that we need in a clear enough way in our job descriptions to get the right candidates. So having that consistency from one evaluation to the next can really help the co-op plan for what you want to do. You're going to want to divide the responsibilities for collecting the data and writing a report. That's something that you're going to want to have as a clear expectation that you set really early on in the process. Here are the people who are going to distribute the surveys. Here are the people we're asking to fill out a survey. Here are the kinds of questions that we're going to ask in one-on-one interviews if we have any follow-up. And here's who's going to do those interviews. Here's who's charged with writing the report, and who's charged with following up and making sure that any changes that are requested are something that's happening. You're going to want to make sure that you collect data from key stakeholders. So you may want to ask other staff, members, officers of the co-op, board members, partners that you've worked with, maybe other co-ops in the region that you've interacted with, or maybe there are city employees that your co-op staff interact with to talk about permitting, or contractors that you've hired, or vendors that sell things regularly to the co-op. Those are all people that might have useful insight about how your staff are doing. So the more you can get those different voices included in the process, the more likely you're going to have a complete picture of what things look like. You're going to want to make sure that you can analyze and filter that data into something that's usable. So the thing that works best for a lot of co-ops is to have some mix of mostly sort of quantifiable questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, how well is this person performing this specific duty from their job description or living up to this specific policy. And you're asking people something really specific, and they can look at it and give you some rating. And then you can average those out, you can give people charts, you can give people all that sort of crunchy analytic stuff that helps people skim through and get a sense of how things are going. But you also want to make sure that you have room for subjective opinions. You have room for things that didn't get fit in there. So you ask 5 different questions about the financial responsibility of this staff person and the quality of the financial reports they give. But then you also say, is there anything else we didn't ask about that you want to say something about? Do you have any comments about any of these questions or comments about this staff person that didn't fit in your responses? So make sure that you have something that you can analyze and filter. Also make sure that you leave that room for people to say something subjective so that you can follow up with them. You're going to want to make sure to create a report that you share with that staff person that includes what they're doing well, specific suggestions for improvement or growth, and information about how well they're doing. The staff person who's doing a great job can still benefit from having new goals and having something to grow into. And the staff person who's not doing as well, obviously you want to give them the opportunity to do what's expected of them and to do what the co-op needs of them. And it may be that you just have bad communication. It may be that you have unclear expectations or misunderstandings about what those expectations are. So an evaluation is a way to get all of that cleared up and give people the chance to really do well and to give the co-op the chance to really understand what the co-op needs from staff. You want to make sure to go over the evaluation with the staff person. Present a written report with clear requirements and a timeline, and go over the evaluation in person. Sit down with this person and say, here's what is going well. Here's what we want to go better, and get their honest feedback. You can also do that in writing, but having those different channels, having it in writing, having a response period where somebody can submit a formal response and put that in their record, and then having these interviews and sitting down and talking about things, they can really sort of clear things up, and you're going to have people who communicate better in different channels. So you may have one staff person who will respond really well in writing, and another who really needs to be able to sit down and have a conversation, and then have that turn into something that gets put in the record. You're going to want to follow up on the items that require it. So, for example, goals or improvements. So you might say, you know, we want to make sure that you respond within 24 hours to any email that a member sends you asking you a question, and we're going to come back in 3 months and look and see whether this is happening. Or we want to see the following improvements in the kinds of education and training that you're giving to the members, or changes in office hours, whatever it is. If it's something that's specific, you're going to want to be able to come back and look at whether or not that's happening in the way that the co-op is asking for. And you're going to want to make sure to file that evaluation in the staff person's file. So you want to have some kind of personnel files, and evaluation should be in there so that whoever it is that supervises your staff, they should be able to go to that file and see what is the sort of track record here, what is the development of this person in their job, the development of their relationships with their work and with the co-op and the members. So who is it that conducts these evaluations? Well, co-op staff evaluations are usually done by some sort of committee of the board, because the board usually has the hiring or firing power. Some co-ops do this by more of a referendum of the entire membership or some other process. So whatever process it is that your co-op has for hiring and firing, you want to make sure that that group of people has involvement in the evaluations. One option that a lot of co-ops use is to have some standing personnel committee, sometimes called a personnel committee, might be something else, but that committee does yearly staff evaluations and also does hiring of new staff when needed, or works through the termination process if there's some major problem. A personnel committee might also be involved with mediating grievances between staff members, and sometimes those grievances are something that you can sort of deal with more constructively through an evaluation process, where you're looking at everybody's voices and you're looking at everybody's performance, and you can see where there's a mismatch or where there's a tension. Another option is to just create an ad hoc committee each year to conduct evaluations. Maybe you just have a board meeting or a general membership meeting and say, well, who is it that's interested in this? And then those are the people that will go through the process. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that there's clear expectations and a clear process. and then you have some clear idea of who goes through that process, so that everybody is coming into this with the same understanding of how the process works, so that everybody feels like there is a process, and that process will be fair and uncover information that's useful. In either of these situations, it's going to be really useful to have members of the board on that committee, because the board is probably going to be involved in these sort of higher level decisions and long-term planning. And so having people with that perspective involved in the evaluation is going to uncover useful information. Now, one thing to talk about is that the person who conducts the evaluation is not the same as the person who gets to provide feedback about the evaluation. So you may only have 4 or 5 board members, or maybe a couple staff members. Maybe you have an executive director or a general manager, and they're doing the evaluation. But that just means they're the person who's giving out the surveys. They're sort of moving through the mechanical steps. They're giving out the surveys, they're collecting them and analyzing them, they're making some spreadsheet that looks at the analysis, they're writing some report, they're giving some recommendations at the end. But that's not the same as who's giving feedback. So you might have all of your members invited to give feedback. You might have people who are outside of the co-op in the community invited to give feedback. Those people aren't doing the evaluation. They're not creating this process or the documents that come out of it, but they are involved in giving their feedback and sharing their voices. So a couple different kinds of evaluation, and these aren't mutually exclusive. You might have evaluations that are a great process and use some of all of this. So you might have a top-down evaluation. You might have a boss. In a lot of cases, that means the board, and they're going to evaluate the staff person, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity for others to give input. That's faster, but you may miss perspectives that give you a more complete picture of the work that's being done by the staff person. So it's sort of a trade-off. Your evaluation will be faster, it will be more direct, it might be simpler and easier. So that may be something where there are situations where that's appropriate. And there may be other situations where you want a more comprehensive process. And a more comprehensive process might be the people who supervise someone also get to evaluate someone. So what you're looking at is if I'm being evaluated, I give some feedback. If my supervisor is giving feedback about me, if the board is giving feedback about me as a co-op staff person, that can give more perspective. You can also have an evaluation that is more or less data-centric. So, you might have an evaluation that has very little room for a sort of narrative, and it's really just about the numbers. It's about being able to put together really clear criteria for what's being done and how well it's being done. And there may be certain jobs where that's very easy to measure, right? Is your finance officer on your staff providing reports in a timely way? Is there low member debt? Is there, right? So these are things that lend themselves really well to working through numbers. Is your maintenance coordinator who gets paid to fix things, are they fixing things in a timely way? Are they staying within budget? So that can be really useful. It is really helpful because it gives you these clear charts and graphs, and it gives you this really consistent approach. But you may have some accidental bias that creeps in the design of the questions or the way that they're weighted. So that's just something to consider. You may have a more narrative approach that's really focused on telling a story about that person's performance and their relationships and what the areas for improvement are. So that's a lot more subjective, but there may be room to have that subjective element or to have a fairly subjective process depending on what your co-op needs. Again, it's a trade-off. So if you skew towards a really numerical process, you may be missing things. If you skew towards a really narrative process, you may also be missing things, or you may have something that is seen as less fair. You'll also sometimes hear about a 360 evaluation. So that's an evaluation where the goal is to collect feedback from as many different sources as possible. So this may mean that the surveys have only a little bit of info. You may have somebody who their total involvement is that they come around and deliver an invoice and measure certain things at the co-op. So 90% of the questions on that survey for the evaluation, they're going to be like, I don't know. So that's okay. You just want to say, what are the things that you do know about and what feedback can you give? So that's one kind of system that a lot of co-ops use. It's a good way to try and reduce the amount of bias that can creep in who's chosen to give feedback, and also in what sorts of perspectives people have. You may find out that your staff person is really great with members, and then with non-members who come in, they're seen as really confrontational or rude, right? So that's something that if you didn't ask non-members, you wouldn't know about, and it may turn out that that's important to you. And another type of evaluation is a self-evaluation. You may want the employee themselves to give an evaluation of their own work based on their job description, and they may even say, here are the things I don't think I'm doing as well as I should be, or things that I think I could do better in these specific ways, or here are the things where I just really feel like I'm a rock star. And that's something that it can be helpful to compare how somebody feels about their own work with how everybody else feels about their work. So there are also these different models that co-ops use. Your co-op may have an executive director or general manager, general administrator, somebody who has essentially a boss role within the staff. In that system, most co-ops have that person, your let's say executive director, they're going to evaluate everybody else on staff because they're the boss of everybody else. So they're evaluating the performance of the people they supervise, and they're reporting that to the board. So in that case, if you have something that's a fair and effective and transparent process, your evaluations for your staff are going to be more useful. So in this system, the executive director evaluates everybody else, and the board or the members evaluate the executive director. So you want to make sure that there's some consistency in how that process looks. You may have co-ops that have only one staff person, or who don't have any sort of executive director role. Maybe you have a collectively managed staff, or you just have multiple different staff people who don't have any specific boss, or have different committees that are their bosses. And in that case, you're still going to want to make sure that everybody is evaluated in a way that is consistent and can be compared from one evaluation to the next, and can be compared from person to person. So consistency is really important, especially in those systems where you only have one person, or where you don't have a specific hierarchy or a specific managerial system, because that becomes your management system, is looking at what's going well and what's not.